Here's what's fun about today and the Cosmic Weather Report here with Sioux Rose is that I get to lead, she says. We'll see how long that lasts. But the Cosmic Weather Report today talks about adverse cosmic weather. And so I'm going to start with the most obvious one, the one we all know. And that is the Mercury Retrograde.
I was surprised to hear Tom Hartman, another Taurus, by the way, that does a talk show. He actually referenced that 2 or 3 days ago. He said, oh, Mercury must be retrograde. I don't know if something was wrong with the sound system or connecting with a caller or what it was. But we say it's adverse because, and I did reference this in an earlier podcast, my understanding is the LAX airport actually posts when Mercury is retrograde because it does influence perception slightly differently. It's really good for writers and creative people that want to kind of get a second look at their own work.
Yeah.
It really does bring a different perspective. But it's considered a very poor time to purchase anything that's computer-based or electronics-based, and even cars today are major computer and major electric. And, you know, I know that it probably hurts these industries to mention this, but the retrograde usually does create a situation where repairs have to be redone over and over again. And a funny example is my second daughter was born at home, a Gemini, by the way. Mercury was retrograde. And when you had a home birth, you had to have a certificate from the midwife in order to get a birth certificate. So they actually told me, my daughter was born in Puerto Rico, that I used the wrong ink. I'm not making this stuff up. There was an old law in the book that had to be some kind of black type ink. So I had to go, you know, find the midwife who really lived in the jungles of Puerto Rico to get her to re-sign it. And they made me do it a third time. So it was like, I can't believe this. So retrograde Mercury. And that's just one of many, many examples.
So typical Mercury retrograde. Okay, so I find a Mercury retrograde time to be a good time to go back and cross T's, dot I's.
That's a very good thing, yes.
Like go over written work, contracts,
Yes.
details that have probably been missed. Like it's the perfect opportunity because it's...
Review.
Yeah, review.
But not start.
Yeah.
Really not considered great for initiating.
All right, so people say things like lost objects, like losing keys, wallets. Is that just like typical...
Retro?
Yeah, Mercury
It can
retro.
certainly be. One time I was teaching school in Puerto Rico, and I had to go to the bathroom really intensely, so I threw the key, ran in and went to the bathroom, and then I decided I'd go grocery shopping. I could not find the key, but I knew logically I had used the key to get into the house. So after I ran out of normal possibilities, I started doing things like looking between my records, in the refrigerator, totally absurd places. So finally, the inner voice said, you're not going to find your key until you sit down and meditate. So reluctantly, I don't always like being passive and yin. Sometimes I'm really into the go, go, go thing. I ran out of alternatives. So I sat down, I went into my best meditation, and a little voice said, it was raining today, wasn't it? And then I remembered, yeah, I had an umbrella, and I look across the room and balance, like in the wetness of the umbrella, the key is looking back at me. So sometimes by not doing, it's when you get into that yin inner space
Reception.
Where you really do get the guidance.
Yeah, you receive.
But that was such a perfect example to me. I'll always remember that one.
So what is it about the Mercury retrograde that makes this happen? What is it about Mercury?
Well, it's the closest planet to the sun, and in mythology, Mercury is the messenger. It brings us messages. And, you know, my joke is, remember in the olden days, if the messenger came back with bad news, it was off with his head.
Yeah.
So when Mercury is too close to the sun, we call that a combust Mercury. People that are born with that, they don't have a lot of capacity to have an honest self-appraisal because the king represents the sun in the chart, your essence, your basic sense of self, and then Mercury is your perceptions. But it does have a lot to do with, like, you know, I like to use the reference of the insect with two antennae. The little antenna go out and touch things and kind of read the world. Mercury in the human chart has a lot to do with the two sides of the brain and how we read data and collate it and come to conclusions. But when it's retrograde, what it is that the Earth's orbit is moving in a way, you know, the Earth travels its own ecliptic around the sun. It looks like it's pushing away from Mercury. So it gives the illusion that Mercury is moving backwards when in reality it's just that the Earth is bypassing it in its own elliptical orbit. No planet actually backs up like your Volkswagen Beetle and goes backwards. But we do reference from the point of view of Earth, and there's enough data, I think, on the retro Mercury to make it, like I said, where even airports sometimes post, you know, be double careful. Really watch your own perceptions on this one. You know, like even biblically, it says 2 or more gather together. I don't usually get jinxed unless there's at least 2 to 3 challenging influences that happen simultaneously, in which case Mercury retrograde can count as one of them. Full moons a lot of times are triggers. And, you know, in the olden days, they used to call it a lunatic. The word luna means moon, because people, it's like the tide. The moon rules the tide. The human body's about 70% water. There's a lot of chemicals and emotions in that water. And, you know, people that tend to get overloaded, full moon can really trigger them. And speaking of triggers, there's been like, what? I think there were 20 domestic shootings in the last 10 days in the United States.
So, well, let's speak about the new moon. I mean, the full moon.
The last one was in Pisces.
So the last full moon was in Pisces.
A lot of water. I had that down in the horoscope that I expected to see, you know, flooding on that one, and there was.
We definitely flooded in our house, yeah.
Right here?
Yeah, in our home.
I can't
believe
all that rain. It. Mm-hmm. I was thinking places like Tennessee and New England, boy. I mean, you know, cities are getting it. Like, look at Europe a few weeks ago. The most beautiful places in places like Germany and Belgium. These old cobblestone streets flooded. There's no place for the water to go. They don't expect 4 or 5 inches in a day.
Yeah. Yeah, we had record.
We had 4 inches here. Yeah,
6.
We had 6. Okay,
6 inches here.
We're talking about Savannah here,
3
guys.
of those inches were in the house.
I didn't know that. Well, I'm on a little hill. Oh, that's.
Oh, we are too.
Really?
Okay, so the full moon. So I think anybody who works in a hospital can understand the howling that goes on in a hospital.
Well, they're actually, long ago when I first got into astrology, I remember reading that police departments actually knew. They actually knew that full moon would escalate, usually violent crime, because people are more emotionally based. Their rational systems are a little bit lower in gear. Now, for people that are really like, you know, objective left brain types, they probably need the full moon just to feel something, you know, to get out of their sort of analytical shell and really emote and connect and have some potential for empathy and feelings. And it's really good for artistic people. Like I think of Hemingway or a lot of these writers up all night drinking and just composing and
howling at the full moon.
Pretty much so.
Yeah.
Pretty much so.
So I also saw in a video like a technical analysis on the financial chart talking about the markets, the financial markets, full moon, new moon.
Because people are emotionally based, and there's a psychology to it, right? If they'll jump on the bandwagon. The new moon is considered the best for starting new things. However, if it is adversely aspected, meaning it's getting some hits from Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, the harder planets, then, you know, it may not be a new moon that's encouraging jumping into something.
Well, I was actually surprised because what they were showing was that every full moon in the market was down. Fluxing.
Yeah. Well, maybe the emotion was fear. I mean, I think we're living in a time of tremendous fear. You know, there's the war on terror, the war on drugs, the war on COVID, the war on poverty. And I realize everything is construed of as a war, which is part of what I've said in earlier podcasts. The premise of Mars, this dominant archetype, has really taken over. And, you know, Heaven's model of 12 signs is like a beautiful cosmic democracy that gives room for balanced expressions among 12 divine archetypes rather than just Mars, where every boy wants to be a warrior and every girl wants to be the sidekick to the warrior. And there's not a lot of other expressions that are really, even in Hollywood. I mean, I watch a lot of movies because of COVID. I'm home a lot.
Yeah.
And I can't believe how much violence there is in movies in America.
Yes.
It's almost a prerequisite.
Well, yeah, that's what that's what drives me crazy about the having a son.
Yes.
The availabilities of what he can be as a man in the world are very few and far between, and it's unfortunate. That's what I like about the idea, the concept of Cassandra's Tale, the book that you wrote, is because it gives him insight into all the different things that he could be.
I love that you said that, because that's really why I wrote that book, because I'm a former teacher, and I realized that our system is very cruel, the way it creates this top-down baboon society where the most bullying, aggressive is considered the king, and then everybody else has to bow down to it. It's just
and if you don't have the fortitude to stand up and be what you're enjoying being, then you won't be it. And that's what's unfortunate too. I don't know. You can still identify with something and think, oh, I enjoy being in this way, like as a man. But society might look at you like, what kind of man is that?
Okay, so 2 things on that. When I was growing up, I'm a lot older than you are, there were movies like To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
Where the ideal man was the guy who stood up with integrity to an unjust system, or Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you know, things like that. But today, I think...
To Sir with...
Yeah, I think that... I really do think that after World War II, there was a kind of over-amping up of the Mars machine, which is the war machine. And even Eisenhower warned, beware the growing influence of the military-industrial complex. Most people don't realize the number of Nazi upper echelon engineers, scientists, and military brass, top brass, that were assimilated into the U.S. because the thought was they didn't want Russia to get these people. They had high intellect. But I do also feel that what's happened is that whether it was because the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe made America so rich, and that created a kind of idea that war equals profit, it's out of control. So much of Hollywood and the archetypes children are exposed to, I should say prototypes, images, characters, have this sort of, like Bruce Willis with the gun, or Clint Eastwood with a gun, or even John Wayne. I mean, it's all about this macho who's the toughest, who kills the most people. They always say it's, the good guy, but he's still doing violent acts.
Yeah. So the moon, I'm going back to the full moon.
Okay.
And so basically when the full moon, as far as adverse cosmic weather is concerned, and you were talking about violent crime coming around, and we were joking about how hospitals get pretty wild and full, during that time as well. So violent crime during full moons.
I still say it's this emotional thing. But every full moon is different. I mean, for one thing, except for the blue moon, the 13th moon that sometimes happens, if you get a new or a full moon on the first of the month and there's 30 days in a month and 29 days later, you can hypothetically have a repeated new moon or full moon in that same sign. That's what the blue moon means. But generally, they're in succession, So the next full moon, we're coming into Scorpio. We're coming into Libra time. The next full moon we're in Libra time, will be in Aries. And Aries is ruled by Mars. So is there a higher propensity for violence? Yes. And I don't actually have, I probably do have the degree of the moon. And it's right in front of me. How do you like that? Yeah. So it's going to be, full moon will be October 20. 27 degrees Aries. Remember, everything is 30 days, 30 degrees. Think of the 360-degree dial. And the bad part about it, it squares Pluto. Because every full moon, you're going to get a full moon in Aries every year, but what colors it, what offers distinction, where are the other planets relating to that full moon? And a square of Pluto is dangerous because Mars, Aries Aries is ruled by Mars. It's the principle of war, and Pluto is the god of the underworld, the stuff we don't see. Secrecy, subterfuge, coercion that happens in a way that the obvious characters are not seen. What I'm getting at is it could be something secret, like a secret trigger. I see a lot of violence around that full moon.
That's October
20.
20.
And it just so happens that Mars itself, that on October 22 in particular, we're going to have Mars squaring Pluto. There is no more dangerous combination that I can think of because, again, Mars represents anger, aggression, war, and it's pure impulse. Mars is the first zodiac sign where the ram just rushes in before it understands the consequences. Fire signs by their nature, and I am one, we go on impulse. You light a match, there's the flame. It's pretty hard to restrict or restrain it. But when it squares either Uranus, which is sudden unexpected events and usually electrical in nature, that's dangerous. And the other super one is Pluto, and that's a Mars square Pluto. And luckily it's not on Halloween per se. That's on October 22. But it can really bring some dark impulses out in people that are not balanced, or people that are really, their whole identification is with something that's Mars related, which is guns or war. I wouldn't be surprised if there was shootout in the United States on those dates around that 20 to 22. But then, that's not really saying anything because it's happening all the time lately.
True, but maybe, around that time, or, around October 20 to 25, you don't
be
do
careful.
big events. You don't, you lay low, you take it easy.
Yes.
It's good
20
to know.
22 is the worst.
I mean, Pluto is the sign of transition too, isn't it?
Transformation.
Transformation.
But the problem with a square is it's like somebody's wrestling with you. It's not like you could stand there and go into a Zen posture and move into this higher vibration. Squares are the hardest angle in astrology. We're talking about adverse weather. No astrologer, or all astrologers, see the square as the most difficult energy. And my favorite way to personify it or make it visual is say, if you're at a traffic intersection and the light is broken, and there are cars coming at you from right angles, that's the square. Do you sit there indefinitely or do you lunge forward risking an accident? The square means two energies are not working their energies out together. They're in a battle. They're combative towards each other. Yeah.
Okay, so because you know how I am, I want to know what is the positive side to this
Well, I mean, you could look at it as everything. They say everything happens for a reason, number one. Number two, the hardest stuff that happens to us pushes us to really gain greater self-discipline, self-awareness. So a lot of times the shocks of life are the catalysts to greater growth. But I mean, I'm not going to say to somebody who maybe loses a child in the next school shooting that, there's something light in that tunnel. They may end up being a person who fights very hard against the NRA,
Yeah.
and maybe actually make some progress at some point.
So something like could it be repetitive cycles that happen?
Always, because all of these planetary patterns do repeat.
So the themes within them, though. So, like,
Can it
for
refer
instance,
back to something that happened in the past that has the same
keeps
signature?
yes, it keeps happening
Yes.
that we haven't changed yet.
Well, the reason, I always love to challenge the word "we" because I think, for example, women's rights are fairly new on the cosmic calendar. I mean, women didn't vote up until about 100 years ago, and right now they're restricting black voting rights all over again. So when you only have the same people sitting at the table making the decisions, it's going to be the same results. I mean, that is the definition of insanity. This is why I love that Greta Thunberg, because she socks it to him. She's like,
That's right.
you old white men and you old, rich women, get the hell out of the way and let the kids, have
Well, yeah,
a
she
world.
says you won't be here then, I will be here. So it doesn't matter what you say or what you think right now.
She's the voice of conscience. I
Yeah.
love her.
So it is possible then to take some. So let's look. It'll be interesting to review after October 20th what happens.
22.
2022.
20 is full moon, 22 is the Mars square Pluto, and I actually wrote 22, 23 because you always give it a date leading in and a day coming out. Same with full moons, like, it'll be specified on your calendar a certain day, but you can damn well be sure that 2 to 3 days before that full moon, weird energy starts to kick up. The cycles are not as linear that you put them in a box and shut the door. I mean, they flow. They're like water.
So I wonder if these cycles, which do repeat, and show the nature of these things within society, give us the opportunity to look at them again and really, really consider how much longer do we want to put
Well,
up
it
with
would help if astrology was out of the closet. It would help, my joke is that, look at all the TV shows. You got Dog the Bounty Hunter. You have, guys in swamps shooting alligators. What is the one thing missing? People don't have this perspective for enlightenment. They're not shown that these cycles repeat. Most people think time marches down the calendar in straight rows. They don't see any reason. There's a very good astrologer named Teresa McDermott, and her specialty is she's got much greater grasp. She's a Taurus, by the way, of history than I do. I hated history because to me all it seemed was redundant dates of different wars.
Yeah.
I would shut my ears to it. But she had this cool calendar of the Uranus cycle. And she showed, over time, Uranus is an 84-year orbit, so she would have 3 orbits of it. So that's 84 times 2 is 168. Add another one, 240 something, I believe. And she would show on this sort of circular calendar, like my moon dance calendar, how certain events lined up with where Uranus was, and you couldn't dispute it. I mean, it was right there. The problem is that the average scientist says there's nothing to astrology, it's superstition, it's medieval, and then they don't allow it. And even this idea of astrology provided the 12 archetypes. It's refreshing from a psychological standpoint because, again, not everybody's meant to model after this, Mars-ruled premise.
I have a question that just came to mind. What do you think happens, the chicken or the egg, as far as the influence in the sky, in the universe, or the thing that happens in the world?
It's all connected. I mean, I don't think you could say one is without the other. In fact, the symbol of yin and yang is perfect, right?
So
the seed of one is within the other.
So we're not saying that Mercury retrograde causes these things.
It
What we're
increases the
saying-
probability.
But are we saying that it's a map in the sky of a timeline of which you read? So knowing you move in existence towards this particular
I
influence.
see it more organic, as it's like one of the things I tell my clients if I'm trying to explain an influence. For example, Saturn is the planet of hard karmic lessons. So the analogy is if somebody's born January 21, the first day of Aquarius, they would have had the impact first. But if you took a little droplet of blue liquid and put it in a glass of water, the entire glass would turn bluish. In other words, once a planet enters a sign field, it imbues that sign with the essence of its own nature. But, from a mathematical perspective, the closer the planet is to your own planetary coordinates, it's like cosmic geography, really, usually the greater and more intense the likely event. But people feel these things from the onset.
But are the planets like the momentum behind waves in an ocean?
I think it's very oceanic. I really do. You know, like
So they would they would be the propulsion to the cause of an event, or the momentum behind an event, or are they simply your read that any kind of an event of this nature would occur during this time, like look out. Not that it's causing
I don't think
the
one
event.
of the things you're saying is opposite the other. The thing is, you know, like you could watch on the Weather Channel, you see the hurricane forming, right? I think you could make the analogy that when we see harsh planets, adverse planets coming into alignments, it's almost like that hurricane only on a celestial level. Like right now, there's a hell of a lot going on the planet Jupiter in reality. And usually when planets have a lot of activity, they do sort of as above, so below, cause residual effects, some kind of resonance on this Earth. We're really not that separate. You know,
Interesting.
it's like, you know, the argument of what happens to the soul at the time of death. You know, does every drop return to the ocean? Yes. But does the drop retain a concept of its own particular, you know, unique essence? And I think it does. You know, I think this is what I've come to believe, that we are God essence. And, you know, all of our experiences go back to this concept of allness, this, you know, the presence of God's spirit, God, goddess spirit. And what we bring into it is the fruit of our own experience. So the pieces grow, the whole, the parts evolve the entirety.
Interesting. Okay, when you brought it back to the within, I grasped it more.
Well, you know, this thing about free will too, you know, like I like to use the analogy, there are three kinds of signs: cardinal, mutable, and fixed. So fixed would be fate, cardinal is free will, and mutable is what happens when fate and free will interact. So it's not like it's all written. There's a certain amount of room for personal individual expression, but I think we have to be honest. I mean, if your society has, you know, 50,000 homeless living on the streets of LA and millions, you know, that don't have any medical coverage, I mean, it's not a sane society.
Okay, well, let's talk about this, because these are themes that play out in different regions of our globe. So are there interplanetary relationships that are going on that might perpetuate these themes?
Definitely.
Homelessness or hunger.
You know, there are charts for nations like the United States. Its inception date, July 4, makes it a Cancer country. It has the moon in Aquarius. And one time, the Boston Globe columnist James Carroll wrote something so profound, not knowing the astrology, but I kept it because it was such a reflection of that concept of the sun Cancer and the moon Aquarius. He said that America is always trying to outgrow its established families. That's Cancer. You know, the rule by, look at the, you know, the Reagan dynasty, the Bush dynasty, the Clinton dynasty. And that the Aquarian moon is what it aspires to be in terms of this egalitarian, you know, fraternity for all, sisterhood, brotherhood, friendship. Aquarius is a sign of ideal. So this is why I think a lot of the new age battle between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius is happening in the United States, because there are many that are really attached to this nostalgic 1950s version of reality.
Yeah.
And then there's the people that are really like, they're really into this new way, and they're really expressing this Aquarian, you know, beyond gender and you know, a more society with sharing, like what happened to Occupy Wall Street, and people like AOC trying to spread around and take some money away from corporate greed.
So what about like the aspects that generate certain events that are going on, like talking about the adverse relationships?
So this Mars square Pluto coming up and
So
the
that's
full
one
moon
we
in
discussed.
Aries,
Yeah.
it basically will manifest everywhere. But I think one of the differences in the U.S. is that the gun lobby is so strong that we have like 1 billion weapons on the streets in this country, and a lot of unbalanced people.
You can certainly guess what would happen in our country during that square.
But what
during
will happen elsewhere?
Yeah.
You're probably going to have, like in South America, there's a lot of you know, indigenous people trying to stand up to protect the rainforest in places like Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil. And many times these corporations, mining corporations, whatever they hired guns. They're killing environmentalists. So you may see something like that where there's more protection. Like in America, you also have the indigenous trying to protect places like South Dakota, I think it's South Dakota, against these pipelines. And there just was another spill. So
could this be weather, climactic stuff happening?
yes.
Or?
Yeah, that's why I'm not I knew that this was going to be kind of a calm cycle until about, I said, once we get out of the September Pisces full moon, and the beginning of September had something, and in fact, that's when the Northeast got flooded. I felt like it was kind of calm going until we get to about October 2022. So yeah, there could be an event, but usually Mars is fires and explosions.
Well, there's volcanoes, right? That's
and
the
look
thing.
at that one in the Canary Islands. Well, the scary
What
part
about
about that.
earthquakes? Is that's
Well, it's funny
volcanic,
because
isn't
in
it?
mythology, and this came from a movie I saw, the Clash of the Titans. I didn't even realize that Poseidon, also, that's another word for Neptune. Poseidon is called Earth Shaker. And this wonderful guy, Dutch Sense, who does brilliant earthquake prediction because he understands the flow pattern. He shows how, sometimes volcanoes are pressure release valves to what would have otherwise been massive earthquakes. It lets the energy come out in a different way. But I think we could see something really major on those dates, yes. Yes.
Okay. What's another relationship combination that's adverse?
Anything with a square to Uranus, Saturn, or Pluto.
Okay.
And we will have the Sun square Pluto on October 17, 18. So there could be
So
a political
October's
event
just
that
basically
happens
a crappy
then.
month.
Well, 17 to 23.
Okay, so
Yeah, because I think the Sun, which is the light of the world,
That's
and
gonna
it
be a tough
represents
week.
rulership, squaring Pluto, either there could be a really scary secret revealed. Like right now, there's a lot of revelation that, Trump was really pushing for, some kind of violent event and the generals had to stop him. So I don't know if it's another expose around him or even something around Biden or somebody else. But the Sun square Pluto, a square always means a lot of energy. And Pluto is the stuff that's buried under the surface and the Sun wants to bring it to light. So that comes 17, 18. Then we have the full moon where people explode emotionally. And that full moon is in Aries, which is a martial sign. And then you have Mars, the ruler of Aries, squaring Pluto, which is, it's very surreptitious. It's very attacked by stealth. It's not a good one. That's the kind of thing that could have like a Pearl Harbor. I don't think it's going to happen. But if it were going to happen, that's exactly the kind of astrological trigger. Now, we would have Mars square Pluto once a year. That's why I'm saying it probably won't happen. This is not like a once in 21 year influence.
Right,
Mars has
right.
a 2-year orbit. Twice it will intersect the square to Pluto in its 360-degree orbit. But if it's combined with other things, like really close to this full moon Aries, that's a second factor. Mercury does go out of retrograde on October 18th, so at least it'll be mellowing there in terms of, not reverse perception.
because you were saying 3 adverse combinations.
Well, I let's see if there is a third.
Yeah.
The thing is Mars, which is, again, this planet of, Mars is about self-interest and self-protection, but in unbalanced people, these people that go on shooting sprees, they actually think they're protecting themselves. And a lot of times police who shoot people without any real true provocation. So Mars goes into Scorpio, and that's a mixed bag. I tell people that are born with that, it's like a mafioso signature because Scorpio is
Right.
the retaliatory sting of the scorpion, and Mars represents your nature, your basic impulses and instincts. And Scorpio says, I'm going to hit back. Scorpio says, I'm going to sting them back if they sting me. So when Mars is in Scorpio, people that have a tendency to have vengeance or vendettas or operate on the basis of revenge, and I have to also say, any sexual violence, Mars and Scorpio is big on that. As a matter of fact, I think when Mars goes across Scorpio, goes in on Halloween. It begins I think it stays there until early December. That's a cycle where, these maniacs with the abortion clinics, because it's basically sex
Right.
violence, trying to control women, we might see more triggers around that issue.
yeah, since we did have a little bit of an insight to that's what's going on.
Yeah, like the
now.
Right to Life who bomb clinics.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
that's
interesting. Okay, so now let's talk about eclipses because that's
Yeah.
a huge one that everybody talks about.
Does
So-
everybody talk about?
Yeah, everybody's like, it's eclipse season or it's eclipse month or there's 3 eclipses this month or I don't even know if that's
Okay,
possible.
there's
I'm
usually
just-
2.
Okay. Well, you're the expert. I'm just the leader.
Well, I had a funny experience with that. I was sitting and her name was Doris Habel. She gave a lecture on eclipses that I sat in on. I believe this was in an astrology event in Miami. This was more than 20 years ago. And as she explained, this fascinated me, that eclipses, you'll like this, they return to the precise zodiac point every 19 years. And at the halfway point, 9.5, you get the lunar eclipse side of it.
that's clean.
Okay, so I'm hearing every 19 years, and then I'm thinking about repetitive things like, look at September 11th. There was a coup in Chile. There was the event in New York, and I believe there was an armistice in Europe.
The flooding that occurred on the day when we had all that flooding and that rain, that was the same time that Hugo hit Charleston.
Okay,
And
and
kicked the
another
crap
big
out of
event,
Charleston.
I
This-
think it was April 20 with like the Oklahoma shooting, the bombing in Oklahoma City, and then there was the Waco, Texas one. So sometimes you'll see dates repeat.
Yeah.
And you could bet your bippy that it's linked to some eclipse.
Why are people so superstitious
Of eclipses?
Yeah.
Well, I think Shakespeare, I mean, he understood back then. That was in the 1400s.
Did he start it?
Well, he has a story where Portia, the wife of Julius Caesar, says to him, please don't go out today. The animals were behaving strangely, which is an eclipse phenomena. And, she just got that, like, women's intuition thing. Honey, don't go out today, buddy. But he felt he should, and that's when he got stabbed to death by, wasn't it Brutus?
Yeah.
So eclipses always have the portent that they could take out the light of the king, because the sun, remember, is the king, the ruler, and the light of the sun is diminished usually by the moon during an eclipse. Sometimes the earth comes in the way. And, of course, it was superstitious if people had no science and all of a sudden the sky goes dark. You can imagine they probably thought, oh,
Right.
we really, made God angry and he's going to put a plague on our crops. So there is a lot of superstition, but Shakespeare played it really well, and astrologers have taken it to mean that danger to the ruler. And there was an eclipse on December 14th, and Trump is born June 14th. And I knew he wasn't going to win the election thanks to that eclipse. I said, this is the darkening of the light of that ruler. And I was in the Florida Keys, doing readings around Halloween, and people asked me, I said, I can't imagine him getting reelected between that eclipse and the fact that Jupiter and Saturn are both going into the much more avant-garde, anti-1950s, Beaver, Cleaver, Leave It to Beaver, America. The universe is saying, no, you already played that movie. Time to move on. And we're really going to see it even more when Pluto goes into Aquarius, which it's actually going to be flirting with it in 2 years. And then it'll be a third. Well, the only negative on that is people get so glued to electronics. There's the tendency to lose their heart. Leo is the sign opposite Aquarius.
So
Aquarius
do your work
is very
now.
detached.
Do your work now. So if you do your work now, right?
And you mean by that, you want to explain that to your audience, what you're saying.
If you can access your within, your unity within, your oneness, your connection to what is your God, your maker, your blessing of life, all of these things, you're within, like everything, the opportunity that COVID has given us because of the extreme isolation that we've been kind of forced into. If you've taken that opportunity to go within and to find that connection, because that is where you can have that relationship, and you will not have isolation if you do such. And then by doing so, when you have your within, you can have your without in a healthy way, right? And so when you're talking about an aspect like that in 2 years that comes, and then you say it could be a disconnect with technology and people can lose their heart. But what if you've been doing this work for
You'll
these
be much
years?
better grounded,
So
yes.
what do you have then for you then? What is the gift for you when that comes into play?
Well, it varies from person to person because Aquarius, what an Aquarius signature means to a Taurus, if it Leo rising, it puts it in your 7th house of partnership with the public. You'll probably be having a hell of a lot more powerful, and this could be through your electronic media, connections with the public, outreach, your voice out there.
Okay. So you're saying that there's a potential for the advancement of what you have done work on.
Yes, and I think, Pluto Aquarius is really good for air signs, which are Libra and Gemini, because it's their element. I mean, they're going to really come into it's like when you're in a plane, the plane is traveling a certain speed, but when that plane goes into the jet stream, it gains more acceleration. Did you know that?
I see.
So there's kind of like a kind of cosmic acceleration. You're still going to be swimming your strokes, but the universe is pushing your current faster. Pluto Aquarius is harder on Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio because it gives us a harder angle. So it really does depend. It's sign or element specific. And then, of course, and this is why I hope people that are open to this will call upon me for individualized readings, because, you're not just your sun sign. Your moon sign plays a vital role. So maybe your sun sign is in Libra or Gemini, and you're getting this terrific trine from Pluto. That's a once in a lifetime, 82 years to get a trine from Pluto. Oh, but maybe you have your moon in Taurus, so you're getting a square from Pluto. And that may mean, because the moon is home and family life, that you have to literally lift up and change where you plant your roots in order to accelerate whatever that positive Pluto to the sun is doing. And by the way, we are publishing monthly horoscopes on this site that are different than the typical, because I explain the most adverse and the best dates of the month at the beginning of each horoscope rendering.
Yeah.
So people who are interested in this can see where the full moons are and if there are any adverse, challenging influences in that particular month.
Yeah. Well, I just love the idea that, just in a general way, to know that in 2 years this influence is coming in where
and it'll stay for more than 10 years.
That's incredible. So you could have a jet stream behind you.
For that long.
Anybody has the potential to have a jet stream behind them so that they spend the next 2 years working on whatever's important to them right now to get ready for this.
Well, the key of
they might have
the
progress.
the keynote to Aquarius is to thine own self be true. If people are operating out of the Piscean delusions, that jet stream may take them into a brick wall. But, the idea of Aquarius is it takes courage, to be honest. It takes courage to really confront the truths of our time. There are so many people that are really lost in delusion and illusion and escapism, including drugs and alcohol, the way they're used by a lot of people. So, coming clean, that's the mandate, right, on any of those AA programs. You got to get clear with yourself. So this is what you're also saying. Yeah. And Leo is the opposite, the polarity to Aquarius. So being centered in the heart, which means love. And Jesus himself said, love is the greatest of these. Or was that John the Baptist? One of them said that. And, there's this beautiful rendering from Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity. The 9th day of the month is love. And he said, no condition is a barrier to love, only the call to love more. I'm born on the 9th. I find that difficult. I try to aspire to that, but I find it difficult. Well, anybody who's honest is going to say it. You have to be a saint to really, totally live from that level, especially today.
Yeah. Well, what you have to be is disciplined because you have to work at that on a daily, it's a muscle that you work out. In meditation daily, even if it's 5 minutes a day.
I've been doing that.
You can increase that muscle. So in general, you can't say something's not possible if you aren't willing to work at it. It's not easy.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's true. And that's why Taurus is such dogged determination. That bull really has a lot of strength.
Tell me I can't. You know what I mean?
You'll force against it.
Well,
right,
I will certainly spend the next 2 or 3 years training to show you what's possible. Yes, of course it's possible. But it takes work. You can't just wake up and be.
And yet you have all these, Sagittarius is the archer, and the archer aims the arrow at the target. And there are many, I'll call them New Age teachers. Shakti Gawain, which is I deserve. Oh, no, that's Sandra Ray. Shakti Gawain was the power of creative visualization, envisioning what you want to see happen. It does work. Or, the power of intention, Wayne Dyer. The problem is that the corollary to Jupiter, this faith-based principle, is Saturn. That's the hard work. So the best possible hybrid is get your vision down and then do the work.
Yes.
Don't get your vision down and then sit on a tropical island eating coconut juice. But sometimes that even works.
Even Buddha knew you couldn't sit on the mountain meditating. Buddha went down and lived life because you have to.
And he was a Taurus. They think he was a Taurus.
Exactly.
The people that were really advanced, that lived, let's say, a few thousand years ago, created the stories of mythology to keep the persona of the astrology, the planets, alive. That's why the stories of time can never go out of date. They're eternal, and these cycles do repeat, and they're very, very real. I remember reading Yogananda's autobiography, and he's advanced, and he spoke about the power of these astrological cycles. But they're not talked about. When Gail Sheehy wrote the book Passages, which was a bestseller, and talked about the midlife crisis, of course, I went to my ephemeris. Do you know that every major planet forms a hard aspect, an adverse aspect to its birth chart position between the ages of 39 and 43? Every one of them. Pluto, it used to be with a 248-year orbit, you'd figure 3 signs would be 1/4 of 248 or 62, but not so. The people born in the 50s, 60s, and 40s, 50s, 60s have the Pluto square come in right at age 42 to 44. Uranus's orbit is 84, halfway. That's the opposition to its birth, 42. Neptune's orbit is 165, 1/4, 3 signs, age 41-ish. Jupiter, 12 times 3 is 36 and half, 42. And Saturn, 28 plus half, 14, 42. So what happens is people are totally disoriented, usually between the ages of 39 and 43.
And they're all driving.
If they're married, they're like, I don't know if I want to stay with this person. They probably don't feel like they belong in the job. If they never finish their college, like my daughter, they go back to college. It's almost like subliminal. You realize if I don't change my life now, I may not get the chance. That is a big one.
Son of a gun. We're textbook. We're all textbook.
So there's always an anomaly, but it ain't the rule.
No, that's for certain. Okay, so some exciting things that are coming up. You are going to take some interesting political characters that are in the news these days.
We want to talk about those who may aspire to the presidency in 2024.
Yes.
But I'm thinking of right now, Governor DeSantis, he's got his hat in the ring. And lately I've heard that Liz Cheney is going to New Hampshire to try to do fundraising to see if she's got a shot at it. And I'm sure there's a third one. So I'm
Ted
thinking
Cruz?
of third.
Or no?
I have to say Trump is right, loser on that one. The poor man wants it so bad he could taste it.
Right.
But Capricorns, there's so many of them that want power. They love power. I know I've heard names.
What about
bounce
Trump?
around.
He's going to want to run again. Obviously, he's not going to. But
I don't know. Well, the thing is, he's such a con man that just saying he's going to run allows him to build up his war chest. He's got all these millions of dollars that people are sending in for some reason. But
he must have a grand trine in his chart.
I have an
Ultimate
article.
protection.
It's www.astro.com, and I think you may have transposed it to the website.
I'm sure I did.
And it's called the Gemini Paradox. And one of the things I say is that, being a former English teacher, there's a very famous play called The Devil and Daniel Webster. And even in any of the movies we've seen, the devil is a hell of a salesman, right? Because the theory is he's got to convince somebody to give up their soul in exchange for whatever the worldly temporal item is. I think not necessarily on a conscious level, but I really do think Trump is a tool of that force because he has really split this nation. He's taken this nation away from its own democratic ideals. It's reverting, the progress made in women's rights, civil rights. There's a lot of hatred that doesn't need to be here, almost like a replication of the Civil War mentality. And he's so dishonest. And, there's a place in the Bible, anybody who knows it better than me could find it, where it actually says that deception is the tool of evil, or the tool of what they call the devil. So there's nobody who's more adept at the use of it, even when they just had that new Arizona recount. Right? And he lost by another couple hundred votes. He gets in front of his people and says, and we won by massive amounts. I mean, this delusional, decapitation of reality. And there are millions of people that will believe, like he said, he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and he would still get the same number of votes.
He was right.
So why does he have that protection? What could possibly protect him and protect him from all the bankruptcies and all the people he ripped off?
You tell me. You're the expert.
Well, I think it's evil with a capital E.
Oh, it's not in his chart. It's not the planetary
Well, in his chart,
influence?
Mercury rules Gemini, and Mercury is the salesman. It's the mercantilist. It's persuasion, and it squares Neptune precisely. I mean, by the degree. And Neptune is the planet of duality and deception. So he's a born liar. And I always thought, even as a kid, that's what he got off on. He already had the money and, the influence. He likes tricking people. He likes it. Yeah. That's his power. He loves it.
And it's coupled with charm.
Well, he's got Leo rising, so there's a bit of star quality
flirty
there,
charm, Yeah. He's got the
But
pizzazz.
his charm is, beat that guy up in the corner and I'll pay the legal bills. I mean, he really does also push this Mars-ruled bullying thing that a lot of macho guys love.
Yeah, they love it. They love it.
And pushing around women,
It's a perverse sense of power, for sure.
Totally.
Or ideal
because the
power.
true, like we said, To Kill a Mockingbird, the true symbol of power should be the one who serves the people and brings up their standard of living, like, basically Roosevelt.
Yeah. All right, so we have an exciting next cosmic weather report. What are we going to call that one? All right, we'll come up
Republican contenders.
Yeah.
And the stars they face.
Republican contenders 2024.
Okay.
An astrological.
A stellar view.
A stellar view.
Okay, cool.
Republican contenders.
You heard it here first, and probably only here. Listen, everybody, God bless and may the stars be with you.
And I'll remind
everyone.
And
watch that full moon.
Oh, yeah, everybody.
October 17 to 23. Don't let the kids run around loose too much in the neighborhood on that one.
Lay low. Don't go to big events and lock up your guns. Really? Don't leave them in your cars. And, and Sioux Rose is available for private readings, of course. And her website is SiouxRoseAstrology.com. And you can see the link below the podcast.